We're going to speak today about the topic of reincarnation, and the subject is a lady called Mary Sutton, who is presently called Jenny Cockell. It's a very interesting story. There are many fascinating reincarnation stories that have been researched in the last few decades. I wouldn't say this one is the most well researched, as in other cases researched by Ian Stevenson, but it's one close to home, and it's also very interesting. It's set here in Dublin, or we should say Malahide. And the lady is still living, so that's also very interesting. You can find her on Facebook. We'll watch some video for maybe 15 minutes. But I just want to put it in context by quoting a few verses from this Bhagavad Gita first. So these are to do with the moment of death and the movement of the soul from that point into the next life. So if you can open your books at chapter 8, text 5, that's on page 372. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So we'll take these two verses together and look at this story in the light of these verses. So Krishna is speaking here to Arjuna. The Bhagavad Gita is set on a battlefield. It's calculated that battle took place in India 5,000 years ago. And these words are recorded by a sage called Vyasadeva. And it forms part of a larger work called the Mahabharata. The Bhagavad Gita is one section from that. And it's specifically containing wonderful instructions from Krishna about life, death, how to live it, what its purpose is, its ultimate goal. And in 700 verses, Krishna explains so many wonderful things for our benefit and enlightenment. He's speaking to a soldier who is having a crisis at the onset of a battle. He's called Arjuna. Arjuna is in a conflict because on the opposing side are his family members, and he's in a dilemma what to do. It's a bit like, say, if you were a policeman or something like that, and let's say your cousin was a drug dealer or something like that, or some criminal. So you might find yourself a little compromised in your duty because he's your cousin, and you don't want to really what to do. Do you put your cousin in jail, if someone who you're close to or you like or whatever, and then the family members are supporting this criminal guy, and what to do. So it's a bit like that. Arjuna, he was facing the conflict of interest, not of interest, but it was a fratricidal war, we can say. And so Arjuna, at one point, he just says, Krishna, I can't fight this war. It wasn't that he was a coward or anything. He was the greatest warrior of his day, but he didn't know what to do. He was in a crisis. He was very depressed. So it's a wonderful setting for all of us, the Bhagavad Gita, because life is like a battle, and we face many crises, challenges, things that we feel like we can't actually continue in our line of what we're doing. Can you just close those windows over here? Thanks. So Krishna, he begins the Bhagavad Gita by speaking about the eternal nature of the soul and reminding Arjuna, because Arjuna was taught in spiritual knowledge, the difference between the body and the soul. He had forgotten that momentarily because he was absorbed in the bodily conception. He was thinking, me, my cousin, my family, this kind of thing. And he had forgotten, he had lost sight of the transcendental perspective on the situation. So Krishna reminded him that his first words Krishna spoke were that, Arjuna, you're speaking learned words like a pandit, but those who are wise, they lament neither for the living or the dead. And so it's a very striking statement, because we feel like we should. Obviously, if someone dies, we feel lamentation. If someone is born, we feel jubilation. So then Krishna explains why the sage doesn't lament, because his next statement he says, Natu evaham jato nasam natvam nemi janadipa na jevana bhavishama sarvevayata param. Because never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all of these kings on the battlefield, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So that's the most, you can meditate on that statement for a long, long time. It's just a wonderful, amazing statement that there's never been a time when we didn't exist. There'll never be a time when we cease to exist. We've always existed. We're eternal. That's Krishna's opening, you could say, salvo of words. But is it true? Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. Sounds great, but is it true? How do we know it's true? So cases like this are interesting because they confirm, they give evidence to support what Krishna is saying. Krishna also goes on in the Bhagavad Gita to explain how the self is moving from one lifetime to another in a cycle of repeated birth and death. And there's many fascinating insights Krishna gives to that process and what's actually going on. So we'll look at these. That's a little bit of context. So we'll look at these two verses specifically from the chapter 8 of the Bhagavad Gita. This chapter deals with death and dying and thoughts at the time of death and the transfer of the soul. So antakale chamam eva smaran mukva kalevaram ya prayati samad bhavam yati nashjatra samshaya. And whoever at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. So all of us, we have to face death at one point. It's a thing that we tend to forget about usually because being an eternal being, we naturally don't think that we're going to die. That's why we don't think that we're going to die. But we have to remember that our body is temporary. We're going to have to leave the body. So the sage or the philosopher, they meditate on death, they think about death. They don't just ignore it. So here Krishna is saying that whoever at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. I'm going to go on to the next verse and maybe read a little bit of the purport, because I'm going to read a few verses here. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. Purport. The process of changing one's nature at the critical moment of death is here explained. A person who at the end of his life quits his body, thinking of Krishna, attains the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. But it is not true that a person who thinks of something other than Krishna attains the same transcendental state. This is a point we should note very carefully. How can one die in the proper state of mind? Maharaj Bharata, although a great personality, thought of a deer at the end of his life, and so in the next life he was transferred into the body of a deer. Although as a deer he remembered his past activities, he had to accept that animal body. Of course, now that's important as well, because even in the deer body, he remembered his previous life in the human form of life. Of course, one's thoughts during the course of one's life accumulate to influence one's thoughts at the moment of death. So this life creates one's next life. If in one's present life one lives in the mode of goodness and always thinks of Krishna, it is possible for one to remember Krishna at the end of one's life. That will help one be transferred to the transcendental nature of Krishna. If one is transcendentally absorbed in Krishna's service, then his next body will be transcendental, spiritual, not material. Therefore, the chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, is the best process for successfully changing one's state of being at the end of one's life. So that was a question that was actually asked in our main book that we studied from, the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken to a king who had notice of his death. He understood that he was going to die in 7 days' time. So he retired to the bank of the Ganges River and stopped eating and began to inquire from the sages there, what is the duty of everyone, particularly at the moment of death? What should one think of? That's a good question. Should we think of anything at the point of death, or should we just like squeal or something, or just well, why is it relevant? One could think, why is it relevant what we think of at the time of death? Because you just die and that's it, and then you're finished and there's no more of you. That's certainly the presentation that's taught in the modern education, the materialistic education, that that's it, you're just finished and you're gone, extinct, no more you. The Vedic culture and most spiritual cultures, and well, indeed all spiritual cultures, they teach, no, on the contrary, the soul, he doesn't just is extinguished at the time of death, he continues. So, where do we go to? Why are we here? Why are we in that situation? These are all very interesting questions that are addressed by Krishna and addressed by the Vedic culture in particular. So this is interesting in relation to this particular story of the lady Mary Sutton. She was we'll see something of the documentary here in a moment. I'm not trying to convince anyone of this particular history. I think it personally is convincing, but that's up for everyone else to make up their mind. But anyway, what happened was that she had many. I think she had 10 children altogether. 2 of them died, so there were 8 left. And I think she died in the hospital here at does everyone know the Rotunda Hospital just around the corner here? So that's where she left the body. And she left behind, I think, 8 children. And at the moment of her death, she was thinking that, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to these children? She was very attached. She was being a responsible mother, as a mother is. She was very distraught that she had to die and leave these children. I recently, my sister-in-law, was faced with the same situation. She left the body some while back, and she had children that she was left behind, and she was very, very disturbed at that prospect, and rightly so. But anyway, that's it opened up a whole avenue in our relationship to explain about the soul and that kind of. Eventually, she did leave the body, and she was okay. Actually, she was able to leave the body without that distress and anxiety. But in this case of Mary Sutton, she perhaps in that life she didn't have a spiritual sense, a spiritual knowledge of the transference of the soul. So what happened is that when she was born in the next life as that little girl, Jenny Cockell, her name was. So right from the start, she remembered her life previously with as the mother of these children. And as a little child, she would be drawing like maps of the place where she lived, and on the map it would say Mary's cottage. She could remember her first name, Mary, but she couldn't remember the second name at this point, which was Sutton. And in videos of her mother, also the mother would be reminiscing how the child would be sitting talking about this thing, like how she lived in another life, and the mother seemed to be quite accepting of it. A lot of mothers are not, and they try to put those ideas out of the child's head. So anyway, she had, like, she would have dreams or even sometimes nightmares of dying and leaving these kids. So it was a very, very strong attachment in this life. And when she had her own children, she got married and then had her own children, then it became even more strong, and she really wanted to find out, how can I resolve this? You know, it was something very deep, sort of traumatic experience in her life, which was causing her these intense emotions in this life. So then she began to research maps. She had the idea that she'd been in Ireland, so she began to research maps and then trying to think where she could have possibly be. So then she sort of homed in on this place, Malahide, and then she got a more detailed map where she could say that, yeah, this was the place where she worked, because it corresponded with her little map that she'd been drawing, like practically all her childhood. She'd been drawing these maps of where she was. So then she she thought, okay, I'll go to Ireland and check this out. So when she got there, then she remembered all of the area where she had lived. She knew her way around. She remembered the little jetty where she used to stand. This was important as well. She was on this. Part of this recurring memory was standing on a jetty with. She didn't know why. This was. She learned later why the case was. We can see that in the video. And then she found the house where she was, but it was practically ruins at that point. And then she went to one of the local people there and tried to find some information. And then he wrote back to her when she went back to England and said that, yeah, there was people here. Mary, the surname was Sutton, and the lady had died and so forth. She gave some history. So then she had a second name, and with the second name, then she was able to contact the local parish priest and stuff to try and find out, you know, the birth and death and all of this kind of thing. Then she found out, so that when she died, then the children had been they had all been separated and sent into orphanages. I don't know why that was the case, and it seems to be they were all separated into different families and stuff like that. So the children in this life never actually met one another until she reunited them again when she researched each one of them, where they went to, which orphanage and stuff like that. So what I find interesting about this is that actually remembering being in that anxiety and having that sense of responsibility at the time of death is not actually what a spiritual practitioner should be thinking of at the time of death. They should have already settled all that before they die, because that attachment was the cause of her taking birth again. And then she found that actually they were all still living. They were living, she was living. They were being taken care of. And we can, you know, it's an important point that the soul is always existing. There's no non-existence for the soul. So we don't actually, that's why Krishna says we don't have to lament for people when they die, because the soul is always existing. It doesn't go out of existence. So existence means you can't die. You can't be killed in any way. Krishna says that you can't be cut by weapons, you can't be burnt by fire, you can't drown in the water, and so on and so forth. So here's a lady that, with a good heart and a good motive, very concerned for her children, but because of the lack of spiritual understanding, it's been a cause of her taking birth again in the material world. Now, why is that a problem? It's a problem because the soul is eternal. We're not meant to be embodied. We're not meant to be experiencing birth, because along with birth comes what? Old age, comes disease, comes death again. It's a repeated cycle. So then again, we're forming attachments. We're creating relatives and so on and so forth. And again, in a state of lamentation because we have to leave them or they will leave us at the time of death. And it's just going on in this perpetual, very unhappy condition. So Krishna, he's speaking this Bhagavad Gita to inform us that if we want to get out of this cycle of birth and death, there is a way, which is to think of him at the time of death rather than to think of any other thing, because whatever we're thinking of at the time of death, that's going to be the cause of us taking birth again. So Prabhupada, he mentions in the purport that one's thoughts during the course of one's life accumulate to influence one's thoughts at the moment of death. So obviously, what we're thinking of at the time of death will be an accumulation of all of those hopes, desires, aspirations, attachments that we've been cultivating in this life, because the soul, being a sentient being, wants to pursue happiness, wants to pursue pleasure, and so we're trying in different ways to get that pleasure in the world, and we're performing that happiness, and we're performing activities in the world which are in pursuance of that desire. That's creating reactions. It's creating attachments, it's creating reactions. That's called the law of karma. So this law of karma it's hand in hand with the law of reincarnation. In the case of Jenny Cockell, who's now born again, there's still a situation there where that soul has to face. Now she knows that, well, I had a previous life, and actually she can remember quite a few previous lives. She remembered a life in Japan as well, where I think she mentioned Japan, and she was able to research that, the facts of her memory, her memory of that match with the facts when she went to visit this place. But does that really answer her question? Like, who am I? Who am I really? If I've been going through so many personas, well, who's the actual self? And why is that happening? Why am I experiencing that? And is it a continual cycle? Does it just go on and on and on perpetually, or is there any end to it? So they're all very interesting questions. If you see here on the screen, I don't know if everyone can see that. In the right-hand corner, you see a picture of Radha and Krishna with their associates in the spiritual world. This is a diagram of the spiritual and material worlds. So basically you have, you see this sort of unlimited light coming out, and within it are all these different lokas, which are like spiritual places, spiritual planets. The main one is Krishna Loka, where Krishna is. But Krishna is expanded. There's just unlimited expansion of living entities. There's no end to them. And that is our original home. It's explained in the Vedic philosophy that we have an original home. So Krishna says, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you. So existence means personal existence. To exist means to be a person. We are spiritual people. So a person means you have a name, you have a body, you have an identity, you have a place where you live, you have relationships, you do things. So in this area, that's our original abode with Krishna, our original home, and our original relationship with Krishna. And we sort of get diverted from that eternal residence into the material residence. That's called Maya, or the material world. So you see there's a little, on the bottom of the picture, there's like a darker area there in the middle of all that light. That's that's a little depiction of the material world. So basically we've fallen into the material world. Krishna, the material world exists as an eternal counterpart to the spiritual world, where we can come to if we don't want to be with Krishna, basically. So it's like Krishna has created that as a facility for us to come into, which is where we are now. So each one of us, all those conscious entities, we have an original place where we live, and now we're finding ourselves in the material world. We're embodied, we're in these bodies, male, female, young, old, and we're forgotten actually that we're spiritual beings. We're thinking I'm Indian or Brazilian or Irish or so on and so forth. And so Krishna, so what happens within the material world then, because of the nature of matter, time is acting on it. We only have a temporary time in a certain body. Then we have to leave that. And according to our desire, Krishna will facilitate that, whatever we want to do in the next life, subject to our karma. Then Krishna will provide another body in which we can again experience the illusion that there is no God. Basically, that's what the material world is. You see in the picture again, Krishna is the center of the spiritual world. That's what God means, is that He is the center, He's the all-attractive person. And when we want to sort of emulate or imitate that position, then we come into the material world. And so Krishna is explaining that if we want to go back to our original position, back into the eternal world again, then you think of me, put me back in the center again, come out of this self-centered consciousness and come back into God-centered consciousness. So that's briefly why we're doing here. There's a whole elaboration of that I could go into for a long time, but that's briefly what we as living entities are doing in the material world. We've left the kingdom of God, you could say, to come into the kingdom of illusion, and got really, really distracted. Okay, so I'll play a little bit of this video and we can see how this is playing out from one life to another. There's one video we watch which I thought was really interesting when she's speaking later. It's an interview. She said, "This is my reality that I'm experiencing." So here we have someone's experience of moving from one lifetime to another. It's actually not such a mystery really if you think about it, because even in this lifetime we're reincarnating. We're not actually physically in the same body that we had as a child. It's not the same body. Every atom in that body is changed. Yet we remember being the child. We remember our childhood. So this is an indication even in our own lifetime that we're not this body. We're not this. That's Krishna's teaching. We're not this body. Okay, so without further ado, I'll play a little bit. You may want to come over closer to this side. That's a picture of that lady. That was an interview done recently with Bob Olson. He has a very nice video channel. He's very. He used to be a private investigator, and then he decided to investigate the sort of paranormal or spiritual side of life. He's got many interesting people on there talking. So this is a conversation. We'll watch a few minutes of that afterwards. But first I'll show the documentary that was made a few years ago.
Now, can the human personality survive death and be born again in another body? Not a prospect that all of us would relish, but surprising though it may seem, across the globe those who believe in reincarnation probably outnumber those who don't. Reincarnation is one of the oldest beliefs, dating back to 1000 BC in India. When they're close to death, some people in Alaska believe so strongly that they even choose their next set of parents. The woman whose story we're about to tell believes reincarnation explains the dream she's had ever since she can remember. Jenny Cockell looks like any ordinary mother. Happily married with 2 children, she lives in the Northamptonshire town of Towcester. But Jenny has always believed that she is also the mother of another family.
For as long as I can remember, I've had dreams of being Mary in Ireland and dying while the children were still young, not grown, in the 1930s. Terrible dreams of being alone in a room in pain, not at home, and knowing that there's nothing I could do to ensure the safety of the children's futures.
Dinner! Come on, your dinner's ready. Now, you're going to have your dinner in a minute now.
During waking hours, I remember happier memories from the life as Mary. I remembered the children at meal times.
But Jenny also sensed trouble in the family.
I didn't know quite why I should feel so uneasy and so concerned what it was that I was really afraid of. Something I was shutting out.
Shut up, you bitch! You, get up! Get up!
The memories were a little bit like pieces of a jigsaw. Some parts were very clear, some parts were vague, and there were so many bits that seemed to be missing. It was difficult to try to get the whole picture.
As soon as she could pick up a pencil, Jenny began drawing maps of the village she saw in her mind, the main roads, the station, and her cottage. And when she got a school atlas, she could even locate where it was.
And after several attempts, just shutting my eyes and allowing myself to be drawn to a place that might feel familiar, I found that Malahide was named just north of Dublin.
For years, Jenny kept these strange visions of Ireland to herself, until at last she could hold back no longer. She had to find out if the memories meant anything. She began at her local bookshop, ordering a map of the Malahide area to confirm her childhood drawings.
It's Malahide that I wanted to look at, or I thought it was...
The maps matched. For Jenny, a first glimmer of proof.
Looks the same.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Now she needed more, and tried hypnosis to plumb her deeper memories.
And just drift away. Just drift off into deep, deep relaxation. 1, 2,
It sharpened up a great deal of the detail.
3,
There's
think about memory.
one of the churches I
4,
saw the outside fairly clearly enough
really
to
relaxed.
make a little drawing afterwards of it. And standing at the end of a jetty, wrapped in a dark shawl, it was dusk, and I remembered waiting for a boat, but I had no idea who was on the boat or why I was waiting for a boat.
You see where you are?
But were these real memories, or just an overactive imagination?
It gets difficult to believe that when you see the consistency of the facts and the findings of the memories between one session and the next. And Jenny's been through several sessions of this at different times, and each time she's been consistent in what she's been telling me. And I find that evidence that I can't ignore, I can't dismiss. It's worth investigating, and there is more to this than meets the eye.
It was enough for Jenny to invest in a trip to Malahide. This was the first time she'd been to Ireland, and yet she felt certain she'd been there before.
I didn't need a map, I knew my way around. I tried to find somebody who might remember the family, who might remember the children.
Back in England, Jenny received a letter from an old man in Malahide.
Relating to the mother who died in the 1930s, she was Mrs. Sutton. After her death, the children were sent to orphanages.
It was the breakthrough Jenny needed. She was able to get a copy of Mary Sutton's death certificate, and from an orphanage came the first names of her children. An appeal in an Irish newspaper then produced a telephone number for the oldest boy, Sonny.
Hello, my name is Jenny Cockell.
Sort of frightened me.
And I've been trying to
In one
trace
way.
members of your family.
Come in and said to my wife, there's something weird here. So I don't know who this person is. And how did she come to know so much about the family? You said that she remembers about the jetty. Well, I explained to her that I used to have a little job as a caddie, and we used to row over to the island, and in the evening we rowed back again.
Thanks very much, Mr. Nugent. Well, Sonny.
And she'd greet me at the top of the steps. And she used to cuddle me.
Great boy, so you are.
With Sonny's help, the picture was finally becoming clear. The pieces of the jigsaw were going in and making things a lot easier to understand. And most of all, he was able to explain to me what I had been afraid of.
My mother was a loving person. She loved her husband and she loved her family.
Can you just read it through there for me again?
But my father was the opposite. My mother was only there for a convenience. He was cruel to my mother. He was cruel to his children. He'd come home from work and he'd be socialist drunk, then start belting her around. And then many a time I used to get between him and my mother. But I saved my mother.
Mary Sutton died at the age of 32. Her children were taken away, all except Sonny, who had to keep house for his father.
It was very painful because I've lost my mother, and then I was going to lose my brothers and sisters. And when they were taken away, it was very, very hurtful and very painful.
I knew that I couldn't settle until the family were reunited. That part of me that was Mary needed to see the children happy.
One by one, Jenny tracked down not only Sonny, but all the surviving Sutton children. And a few weeks ago, at the home of youngest sister Betty, they were reunited, all together again for the first time in 61 years.
Oh, Christy.
It's Betty, is
It is indeed.
How are you?
Great, and yourself? Come on.
Brothers Frank and Christy,
Don't cry.
Phyllis and Sonny.
Mary, Betty.
Unknown to Phyllis, she and Betty had lived within 15 minutes of each other for 40 years. And it's Phyllis who appears in the only photo of their mother, Mary. They're all about to meet the woman who believes she is Mary, back from the dead.
Hi, Jenny. How are you?
So, Jenny Cockell has reunited a lost family. But are they convinced she's the reincarnation of their mother?
Priest only lives across from us, Father McCarthy.
priest too.
And I said, Father, to him, he said, I wanted truth now, I said. Do you believe in reincarnation? He said, that is all I can answer, Chris. He said, is that your mother is calling from heaven. And it's coming through you.
Jenny's dreams are Mummy's thoughts. Basically, my opinion is that Mum wanted us all together again.
And Jenny was the lucky one that she chose and put her soul into Jenny. That's the way I look at it.
I wonder why the steps are there.
And to complete the reunion, a homecoming. Back to the remains of the humble cottage in Malahide that the family left after the death of their beloved mother.
She is back again. I believe that my mother is not passed on. She hasn't passed over, as we say. The wounds of the years of separation, the wounds of not knowing where my brothers and sisters were, those wounds, Jenny, is healed now. Because now I know where they are. I know they're alive and well.
Jenny Cockell has just written a book about her experiences. Yesterday's Children, published next month, will be the latest addition to the Harry Price Library of the Unexplained.
John, how do I get, where's John? Over here. How do I get down to the next one? Hit escape. Escape. So, she didn't try and, you seen there, the children, they were kind of speculating like how this woman could know so much about their family. So she didn't try to change their opinion on that. She knew herself that she was convinced herself that she was their mother and that had taken birth again. But she didn't try to
persuade them of that. She just let them think whatever they were able to think. So I want to show you a few moments here of a more recent interview with her, which is interesting. It's about 5 minutes, so maybe we'll have some questions if anyone.
I mean, I'm sure that one of the first questions that's going to come to people's minds are, were you living these lifetimes simultaneously? Would that?
No. It works normal physics.
It does.
One after the other with a gap in between.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
in fact, all of the lives I remember are linear with a gap in between.
They do.
Sometimes the gap's larger, sometimes it's smaller. But I mean, I remember things like the death. I mean, I was taken back to the hospital that I remember dying in as Mary Sutton in Ireland. I realised it wasn't at home because there was electric lighting. So when I found out it was a hospital, I thought, well, that makes sense because the house didn't have electric lighting.
Yeah.
And I was asked, well, can you find the room? And I thought, well, it's a bit of a tall order.
Yeah.
But I drew a little sketch out, and I said, look, I remember corridor here, I remember window there, I remember room there. They took it to the matron at this hospital, which we knew about because it was on the death certificate. And she said, oh, yes, I know that. That's the isolation room. That's where they used to put people who were ill, when they were pregnant, which was obviously what had happened. So
yeah.
It was, during the birth of the last child, there were problems. And we went there, and the first thing I did when I got into the room, I thought, there are 2 windows. I only remember one window. I knew it was 1 floor up because I could see the trees out of the window. Then I moved round to where the bed was, and there was a pier that obscured the other window. So, which is why I could only remember the 1 window. But this is why I was saying I didn't think I had enough detail.
Yeah.
I had tons of detail. It's just lack of confidence. There was a lot of detail there.
That's right. And can I show? Let's show the book first. And this is the first book that you came out with. Let's see if I can line that up correctly. Bring it back a little bit. So, Across Time and Death, a mother's search for her past life children. I know this was a very popular book. I know that our friend and former guest of Afterlife TV, Dr. Brian Weiss, wrote a quote here, a fascinating book. I know that you had a little bit of... he met a couple of the children of Mary's children as well. Let's just back up a little bit for those people who are not familiar with this story. I just want to say, I want to show that photograph. And if there's any flickering, I'll let everybody know. You're in England, I'm in the United States, and we're on Skype. So here, I don't know if people can see it, but you get the general idea that this is a map of your town.
From childhood.
From child. You drew this as a child.
Again and again.
Again,
yes,
again and again.
Yeah. And I tried to remember what was down here and what was there, and again and again.
So that's fascinating. And then, at what point did you start to look at maps? How old would you say you were when you started to look at maps? So
probably about 7 or 8. I've always loved maps.
And was that around
why I actually wrote a book? It's because you have these experiences happen. This was my reality, and I realised it must be other people's reality. Yeah. So really, it was to share the story, so that mostly I didn't expect or even think about how people would accept it. I was trying to reach other people like me.
Yeah.
Who just might want the reassurance.
And I'm sure you did.
Up their own life. The fact that it took off was quite right. I hadn't even thought about it.
Well, this is, we find this with Afterlife TV all the time. I have a guest on about one particular subject, and then all these people are telling us that they've had similar experiences, and I'm sure that'll happen here as well. And so not only did you draw these maps, but then, as you said earlier, you looked at a map to determine, and you've sort of just figured out what town it was.
That's it. Well, I was remembering, obviously, I had seen a map when I was Mary. I knew where I lived.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were asked where you live, you can point out on a map where you are. All I was doing was remembering, pointing out on a map where I was.
That's right. Now, now you also had dreams, and would you, are these sleep dreams, or are these daydreams, or are these both?
Well, sometimes the remembering is just like any other remembering, because I look at it as linear.
Yeah.
It just feels like I've had a very, very, very long life and changed the body a couple of times, and grown, and then got old. And then, it's like normal memory. So sometimes I'll sit and think about something, and it's exactly the same way you might think about your first day at school, your best friend when you were a child, and then you start to think about the detail. So most of the memory is like that. And when it starts coming the dreams, it's because you're thinking about it a lot. And it's starting to sort of take over a little bit and push itself a bit. It's an important memory. It's trying to make itself felt. You're supposed to be remembering it. You're supposed to be thinking about it. I think it happens if you try to ignore it.
So we just leave it there. Can you open those windows? Does anyone have any comments on that or questions?
Is she a Krishna devotee?
Is she a Krishna devotee?
No, why not?
Well, that's the point. Well, what Krishna, actually, it's a good question. Is she a Krishna devotee? Krishna explains in the Gita, Mamai Vamso Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. Every living entity is my eternal part and parcel. They are, what does Krishna say? Do you know the first number? 15. Yeah, good. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So, according to Krishna, yes, she is Krishna's devotee, but like all of us, we're not conscious of that. Some of us are conscious of that to some degree, and others are completely forgetful of that. That's why hearing the Bhagavad Gita is important, because people are having these experiences. I mean, right now there are thousands and thousands and thousands of cases which have been researched on past life memories by this school in Virginia, started by E. Stevenson. He was a professor of psychiatry, I think, or psychology, one of those branches. And he'd been studying children's past life memories for 40 years. He accumulated thousands, and they're just fascinating cases. They're really incredible. And his successor is Jim Tucker. He wrote a book recently called, I think it's called Life After Life, Extraordinary Cases of Children's Past Life Memories, which really are extraordinary. So these are things that people are experiencing. You know, they just remember just like we remember being a child or something. So she was saying in that, it's just like you just remember back and back, but you just have a few bodies, different bodies in between. It's the same person having the same memory. So, like, laws are, say Newton discovered the law of gravity, but he didn't really discover the law of gravity. Gravity was there, it just, he sort of figured out how it was working to some degree or other. So the same with the law of reincarnation. The law of reincarnation was there, but people like Ian Stevenson are great, very landmark scientists who are basically explaining the process, researching it and explaining it and presenting it to us, which otherwise would just be forgotten. You know, all these cases are there, but they would just be forgotten. What she's experiencing there, coming back into that family, is probably what we're all experiencing, just that we don't remember that we were, when we come into certain groups of certain families and certain association, there's karmic reasons and desires why we're in the association that we are, but we just can't remember that who the people are in this life, that, like she's able to, those children that she had, now she's looking at them and remembering that they were her children from the previous life. But when we look at one another, we can't remember what
the relationship was in the previous lives that we have with one another. But there's another amazing personality called Brian Weiss. He's been putting together cases like that. They're just fantastic. He wrote a famous book called Many Masters, and quite a few books after that. And it's really just fascinating to read all those stories that he's accumulated. He's more interested in the healing side of past life memories. He uses hypnotic regression. There's regression through hypnosis. And when the people are remembering those lives, then the trauma of the death and the life that you experience carried into this life, he generally finds that it heals. It can heal illnesses, phobias, all kinds of stuff. And that's quite fascinating as well. Birthmarks is another. Anyone got any prominent birthmarks on their body? Ian Stevens in his research is indicating that that's probably due to a violent death in the past life that's carried on into this life. One of his latter books was, I can't remember the title of that, but it was thousands of cases on birthmarks and how the people were dying in their previous life and then the imprint on this life. So that correlates the child's memory of how they died. Like say, for example, if they got their head cut off, there was instances of that. And there's like a birthmark. So the birthmark will appear on the place where, in that manner of death. And the child, there was even a case of a child who went back to the village and was looking at the people, who pinpointed the people who had murdered him in the previous life. That's all quite extraordinary stuff. So anyway, that kind of science is that. This is Ian Stevenson. He doesn't see. There's a difference between evidence and facts. You can present things can be presented as evidence, but to prove them factually is very different, very difficult, because how do you prove something like that? But the evidence is there. Robert?
Are we on to the next question?
Yeah.
Do you happen to, this is a two-part question, do you happen to know if there was a time delay between the death of Mary Sutton and the birth of Jenny Cockell?
Yeah, there was some number of years, I think, in between the death and the present birth. So I don't know exactly what was going on there, but I presume another life,
That was my second question.
or that she just can't remember.
Well, yeah, what may be the Vedic explanations for the possibility? Does there have to be? I mean, we can all speculate about it.
Yeah.
Is there any Vedic source that says? I can think of one in particular, but in your opinion, what's the best explanation for two lives that appear to have something else between them?
Yeah. Well, there's also books now on life between lives. That's a whole interesting study as well. I wouldn't want to speculate on that too much, but I would presume, there's be a number of reasons. One is that they did have a life in between those, but they can't remember that particular one for some reason. That there's some life in between life. Something's going on there. Could be a number of explanations. But I wouldn't want to speculate on that too much, because I don't know.
You could have been roasting in hell that just didn't want to remember.
You're not going to hear the post office just waiting for 20 years.
Because time is time is unusual. Like you could go into some sort of unconscious state for some time, and then I don't know.
Sorry, just a question. In the Vedas, is it always suggested that there's just a short time between lives? Is that what we believe from the Vedas?
Well, I can just say generally that sometimes people will say, for example, grandfather Joseph died, and then just a week later Mary gave birth, that must be the reincarnation of grandfather Joseph. But it doesn't work like, it can't work like that. Because the soul, it's not that the soul enters into someone else's body. There's already a soul in that body, which is where the child is born. There's a soul in there already.
Yeah.
So you have to, when you leave the body at the time of death, then you're going to be placed into the womb of the mother, and there's going to be a conception. So that conception is when the soul enters the body. It doesn't enter the body when it comes out of the mother's womb. The soul is already there from the time of conception. So if there is, someone can die and then be placed immediately in the womb, and then 9 months later they'll be taking birth again.
It's just that we talk about Brian Weiss. There's another guy out there, a guy called Michael Newton, and he's a hypnotherapist, and he's done an awful lot of cases, and he's trained a lot of hypnotherapists. There's one lady here in Dublin actually, and what he's interested in is the gap between lives.
Yeah.
And it happened that his first patient, he didn't expect her to go back because he didn't know anything about reincarnation when he started working with her. But with everybody he's worked with, they all go back to the gap, and in the gap they meet their soul friends.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because it ties in very much with my belief in the Vedas, because even in the spiritual life, you know, on the earth you're allowed to travel to Brazil or to Mexico, but in the spiritual life, nobody commented on it, but I spotted it, that everyone keeps in their own, you know, they're with their own teachers, they're with their own soul mates. You don't see what's going on in the other group over there. And though it's very beautiful and very loving, you work out what you have learned in your past life. And nobody is told who God is. That's very interesting. It seems to me that part of the soul journey is to find out that Krishna is God.
Yeah.
That's just why I asked about the gap, that's all.
Yeah, I could just say in conclusion, because we need to finish now, that reincarnation memories don't get us any closer to understanding our real self, the identity of the soul. So the soul has an identity. Like, again, back to that verse I quoted from Krishna. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all of the kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So these are personal pronouns. Krishna's referring to the soul here. He's not talking to Arjuna, and he's not talking to the material body, because that's not the I, that's not the self, the body. He's talking to the soul. So when he says, never was there a time when I did not exist. What Krishna wants, what Krishna consciousness is self-realization. So self-realization means to understand our eternal identity. So now we're going through all of these facts. Now she had the identity of Mary Sutton. Now she has the identity as Jenny Cockell. She's actually written books about future lives. So we will have future lives. Whether we can know them or not is another area. Probably we can, just in the same way that we can know previous lives. But the point of being that it's just another identity. So past, present, and future, whatever we're experiencing in the material world is not our actual identity. So self-realization that Krishna is teaching is to understand our original identity. The soul is not impersonal, the soul is personal with identity. That's very important. And so Krishna in the Gita is explaining that process, how we can come to our original spiritual, our eternal spiritual identity, give up the illusory identities that we're assuming in the material world due to two things, karma and desire, two things that are keeping us in the material world. So if we transfer our action, our karma means the actions, so we engage our actions in Krishna consciousness, perform Krishna consciousness activities, devotional service to God, and place our desire in God, who is all desirable. That's what Krishna means. He's all attractive. So these two things, then, at the point of death, we will be able to think of Krishna, and we will be able to go home. That love for Krishna is within everyone. Like, it's her love for her children brought her back into that life, right? But those souls who that's also an identity. That's a false identity that's been assumed in that relationship. She's the mother, they're the children. It could be in the future lives. It could be a different arrangement. She could be the child. Some of them could be the parent. So, but the affection, the love that all souls have for Krishna, and so herself, her family, her past families, her future families, all of them, the goal is to go back to Godhead again, to get out of this illusion.
Thank you.
Just quickly, sure.
Her story appeared in one of the English papers about 5 or 6 years ago.
Her story?
This lady's appeared about 5 or 6 years ago in one of the English papers.
Yeah, the Independent. There's a really good article on it.
Which one it was? I wish I had kept the article.
Yeah, you can find it online. I was looking at it.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. And the other true thing is that remember the story about the Australian lady?
Yeah.
Who was born in Scotland a long time ago, 250 years prior to that. And she came back, she was able to say that this wall was not here, you know, and they brought maps and all that.
Yeah.
I think you know the story about that.
Yeah, it's all.
That where she was living then in Scotland about 250 years ago, and she was now born in Australia.
Yeah.
And she came back and showed the people there that at the time the building was this and the university was this and so forth. She was and the other one is Robert Stack used to present a program called Unsolved Mysteries. Did you remember that? Well, Robert Stack is one of the actors. He presented this on television. In 1990, he interviewed a lady who died at the age of, born in 1900, died in 1911, was reborn in 1945. So when he interviewed her, she was 45 years old. And she was able to remember everything of her childhood from the time of, up to the time of 1911. And they checked it out and they researched it, and it was all true.
Okay, so thank you all for your attention.
Just one point more. Satyanarayana Dasa is a Stephen J. Rosen. He's a disciple of Prabhupada. He's written a beautiful book on reincarnation. He's written 35 books so far. And one of them is Reincarnation. So it's a good book to get hold of.
Thank you. Okay, so we have some kirtan now. Then we'll have some vegetarian feast at about half an hour's time.